Hi, this video is about capturing fees and disbursements and then subsequently invoicing. Prior to that, you can produce a pro forma to preview it. And there's also, we'll just cover the analysis, the report you can do on fees and disbursements. So the first thing you need to do to capture fees, you need to identify which matter or select the matter. Now, there's various ways of doing that. You can select the matter in the search bar. For instance, if I say, just start typing any part of the word. For instance, I put damages there, or if the client phones with their reference number, just type that. So you can type any part of the client name or matter description, and you click on it to select. Now, having selected it, the matter is displayed with all the details. And if I scroll down, you'll see you've got capture fees. When you're on the matter here, the other option is just to hit enter, and it jumps straight to fees. Now, on capturing fees, you'll see there's time-based, unitary, or disbursements. And the fee earner, the logged in fee earner, will be here. If it's a non-fee earner that's capturing fees on behalf of a fee earner, they would select the fee earner from a list. The fee level for time-based is at what rate has been assigned to this particular fee earner for the different fee levels, whether it's city council. So standard in this case could be 2,000 Rand an hour, city council might be 2,500 an hour. A pro bono could be zero, and there's a special rate of 1,600. So this could also be a client. So if I leave it standard, the next thing you will do is select an activity. Now these activities are totally customizable. So you could set up your own list of activities, and you can have any number of them, and I'll show you later on how you can filter to quickly find. But for the purpose of this, let's choose consultation. Default to today's date. There's a narration that's from the activity, and that's the purpose of the activity. And I could say to something like that. The system also does a spell check as you go along. You'll see a little red line underneath. You can right click and choose. I can then select minutes. And for instance, 1.5 hours would be 90 minutes. So you select this in terms of minutes. And you'll see the system has picked up by standard rate 2,000, calculated 45 minutes, added VAT. If you're not registered for VAT, there would be no VAT here, and the amount. Now, a couple of things here. Number one, the minutes. LawPractice works on the basis of per 6 minutes or part thereof. That can be changed, but that is the national international standard for lawyers. And the reason is because it becomes 1/10 of an hour, so you get reasonable looking amounts. But it is a parameter you can set, so it could be 1 minute, 15 minutes, whatever you want. But the default, and we recommend per 6 minutes or tenths of an hour, and that can be included in your letter of appointment with your client. The other thing to mention, you can use a timer up here. You start a timer, pause it, stop it. Quite interesting, if you pause the timer and you go back to a dashboard, you can actually see which matters have got pause timers, and you can click on the matter on the dashboard to revert back to it. So if you're in the middle of consultation, there's an urgent phone call. If you had been timing that consultation, you could jump out and start the timer on the phone call and then just click back to come back to carry on from where you were. Once you save that, this will now be recorded as unbilled, which is equivalent to work in progress. If I scroll down again past the recording, you'll see it's added that entry I've just made here. 45 minutes, my rate, and there it is. Now, being unbilled, these you can delete or edit There's a lot of other stuff I've got here that I've previously done. But for instance, you'll also see there's a number of options here. And above that, you've got a summary of all your transactions for this matter, including your financial, your invoices, your business transactions, any trust money you've received or that's gone out, Section 86 for investments, etc. But if I take the pro forma option here, that will now produce a pro forma invoice, which enables you to do one of two things. Either internally, you can check the invoice to make sure you're happy with it. And it's particularly useful if you've got a senior partner who's got multiple lawyers working on the system or on the matter, recording fees, where the partner wants to check the invoice before being sent out and maybe make some adjustments. So this will summarize everything on the invoice. There's the client who you see, for instance, their reference, that's where you would keep it. You'd have their tax number here, which is entered on the client. The details, and you've got different types of fees here. It also might have disbursements, which we can look at later, and then you'd have a summary. This sort of information, you can have your bank details here, you can have terms of payment, but this is customizable. Very importantly is a short, brief matter reference number, because we have a program called ReconZilla, which allows you to import bank statements and post directly from the bank statement. If the client quotes this when they make a payment, they make an EFT payment, having imported the bank statement, it's a single click for the bookkeeper to, after checking the details, just to post that and reconcile the bank all at the same time. So it becomes tremendously efficient to manage and you can have any number of banks to manage those banks. So if you're going to do an invoice, a tax invoice would look exactly like this with all the same details. And you could also send this to the client for them to verify that they're happy with it before you continue. If I go back up here and I say unitary, I want to charge unitary just to show what the difference is. On unitary, you'll see there's a different set of options here. And for instance, to give you an example of the filter I mentioned, if I say travel, I'll just start typing TRAV, anything in the narration. I can check on traveling. I could say this is 45 kilometers. I could expand on this and say to clients, head office, for instance, for meeting. And I save that. And you see it's calculated, added VAT, etc., etc. So if I come down here, there's that entry I've just made, 4 Rand 50 a kilometer. So it's calculated that. Now, just getting back to the dashboard, I started off by mentioning that you must first select a matter, and one way is through the search. Another way is that if you're diarizing your matters as you should be, when you walk in this morning, you would have, for instance, there's 6 matters that have been diarized for action today. So it shows the matter, it shows who the client is, who the matter has been assigned to, because you can also assign a matter to a different fee earner. For instance, I could have assigned to Fred for Thursday to collate documents for court, for instance, where I'm going to appear in court on Friday, and then I'd assign for myself on Friday to be in court at 10 o'clock. But if I click on a matter like this, alleyway appeal, if I scroll down, you'll see that on this particular matter, I've also got a disbursement. Now, to capture disbursement, you would go here, and now you get a different list of options. For instance, I could have advocate. And if we registered for VAT, but our advocate's not registered for VAT, some lawyers believe that they should then not charge VAT on that advocate's account. Others believe they should charge VAT because VAT is dependent on who's supplying the service, not who the service has been supplied to you. So that we just allow both options because different people will want to do it the way they want to do it. So if I said advocate's account, it would be by default with VAT. I won't go through the whole thing here, but just to explain, you would simply say, put a quantity of one and say it was 1,540 Rand. And you can also capture the opposite side of the entry here, because that is two things. It's a service that's being supplied to you on behalf of your client, and then you're charging your client for that service. So if the advocate charges you, they send you an invoice, the firm pays the advocate, but you want to charge the advocate's account to your client as a disbursement. So you would simply say who the advocate is here, or who, whatever the expenses. It could be an air ticket, it could be a sheriff's return, it could be a medical expert in an RAF matter, whatever. You would have the invoice number. Now what you can also do is browse and attach their account so that when you submit the invoice to your client, it will attach that as well. So if I just clear that and go back to look down here, here's an example of where I've done exactly that. So I've got a consultant account, in fact, in dollars. I've converted it and I've raised it without VAT in this instance. So if I look at my pro forma here, you will see that it will show the disbursement as a disbursement. So there's my disbursement, there's the entry, and it'll also summarize it separately here and show me if I've got any money held in trust for this particular client. Now, when it comes to invoicing, if I would now simply say invoicing, it would take all this unbilled work in progress out of here and convert it to an invoice. So I've already done that here. If I go to my accounting entries, and for instance, if I look at this entry here and I click on the invoice number, it will actually then produce the invoice for me, or show me the invoice that's already, this invoice already been sent to client. To send this invoice to client individually, all I would have to do is simply click send. And what the client would get is, let me just see if I've got an example of this. Yeah. So as an example, I've just sent this to myself. The client would get your firm's name here, a summary of the invoice here, but attached to it would be the actual invoice. So there the client would have the invoice. And in this case, I've also attached the consultant's invoice, the disbursement. Okay, so that's one way of doing an invoice. Just while we're on the invoice, there's a couple of issues here. If you had done an invoice that was incorrect, you can never just make it disappear. Once it's an accounting entry, the only way of making an invoice disappear is to produce a credit note. In LawPractice, we make that much easier for you without having to recapture everything and etc. You can simply say reverse, and that will then create a mirror image copy of this invoice as a credit note. So everything's in the opposite. And you could then also copy back to unbuild all the information, because to give an example, we had a client who had a 5-page invoice to City Council. The very last entry was a disbursement. The City Council said, sorry, agreement was no disbursement, re-invoice. They weren't willing to get just a credit note for the disbursement. They wanted a completely new invoice. So what the client did was reversed, copied back to unbilled, removed the disbursement and re-invoiced. And then there's another feature that's very useful. Reversal shown. So if we get back to where we were here, we look at the accounting entries, you'll see these options have changed. And one of them is now you can do a matter statement. And a matter statement shows all the entries, but here you've got an option to hide your reversals, which means that if you now do a statement as the client would get it, it will not show the reversals, because reversal is a mirror image copy. That credit note it will show, because that is an actual credit note generated, but the original invoice and credit note that was reversed doesn't show only the amended or the new invoice. And while we're here, just to mention the statement, you will see separates business and trust. If we had done a trust transfer immediately before the statement, you would see a debits in trust reducing to 0 and a credit in business reducing the amount owing by the client to 7,290. The other issue is that you've got an option when when sending a client a statement to add all the invoices, and the client can also access the invoice directly from the email they receive of the statement. So there's never the issue that they haven't got the invoice when they've got the statement and you're expecting them to pay. Okay, I mentioned that invoices can be generated individually or in bulk. So there's a couple of ways in bulk. We've looked at the individual method from a matter. So if I scroll down, first of all, draft invoice. This will list all your work in progress. That's for this particular fee earner. So it's all this fee earner's work in progress on every matter. So if I scroll down here, for instance, I can see this matter we looked at earlier. What's also very useful, you can see if there's money in trust. So for instance, I know that if I invoice this and I do a trust transfer, I can release 30,000 Rand from my trust bank, which is very important for cash flow. So what you can do is you can select, and you might select a few others as well. Select various matters that you want to invoice. At the bottom, you can either send pro formas to all of those, raise invoice and send, or raise invoice without sending. This last option is because you can include all the invoices on the statement of account, which you might do in bulk at month end. So that's the one way. And if I simply click one of these, it will send the invoice. Now, the other thing to mention is that where the invoice is sent, if I go back to an account here, just to quickly look at where invoices are sent. So it shows me here where they're going to be sent. But if you look at the client, on the client, you've got a mandatory email address. So every client, you have to have an email. If your client, for some weird reason, didn't have an email, you could put your own or your firm's email address there. Now, if none of the other email addresses are complete, everything will go to this email address. But if you want your invoice to go to a different email address, you would put that different email address there. If you want your statements to go to a different email address, you would put the email address there. Now that's on the client, so that'll apply to all matters for the client. Over and above that, on the individual matter, so if I update the matter here, you can also put an invoice email address on the matter. So if I've got 10 matters for clients and only one of them I want to go to a particular department, I could, on that particular one, I could put the different email address there. Okay, so other ways of looking at, if I go into the menu on the bookkeeper side and say send bulk pro forma invoices, this is a different way of sending in bulk. What this will do is go through every single matter that where I'm able to invoice, in other words, where there is unbilled fees and or disbursements, and it will list them for me to select. Now, what you'll see, some of these are automatically selected. So on the client, you've got the option to say, do you normally want to send a statement to this client? Is that the default? So if you said yes, then this would be ticked, but you can untick it. And one that hasn't been ticked, you can tick. So, and you can also say, I want it for this particular matter, but not this matter for that client. So it's totally flexible in terms of what you select. Once you've selected what you want to invoice, you can simply, again, do send pro formas for everything selected, send and raise invoices or raise invoices. So as you can see, you've got quite a lot of control over how you invoice clients.